Alara stood at the edge of her own wedding breakfast, a bride in ivory silk, and felt the cold truth settle deep in her chest. No one was looking at her. The grand hall of Hawthorne Hall blazed with candlelight and the murmur of 100 titled guests, but every gaze slid past her as though she were part of the gilded wallpaper. Her husband, Alexander Ashford, the Duke of Hawthorne, stood a full room away, his broad shoulders turned toward a cluster of political allies. He had not glanced at her once since the ceremony ended. Not once. She had married him 3 hours ago, and already she understood that she had married a fortress with no door. Her fingers tightened around the stem of a champagne glass she did not drink from. She had imagined this day 100 times in the quiet of her family's crumbling manor, before her father's debts had swallowed their name. She had imagined a cool but gentle husband, a man who would learn to care for her. Instead, the Duke stood distant as winter stone, his dark hair catching the light, his face carved from marble and indifference. When his grandmother, the formidable Dowager Duchess, had announced the match, an alliance that would save the Wyndham family from ruin, Alara had dared to hope. She had once seen the Duke from afar at a country fair 3 years ago, when he had paused to lift a crying child from the mud and hand him back to his mother with a soft word. In that moment, she had seen kindness beneath the frost. She had carried that glimpse into her marriage like a candle in a storm. Now the flame was guttering. A throat cleared beside her. Lady Cordelia Vance, a diamond of the season with hair the color of spun gold, smiled with the precision of a stiletto. "Your Grace," she said, the title dripping with false honey, "how splendid this must be for you, to rise from such humble prospects to mistress of Hawthorne Hall. The Duke is so dutiful." Her eyes flicked across the room to Alexander, and something possessive and knowing glinted there. Alara's stomach tightened. "He is a man of honor," she replied quietly, her voice steady even as her heart stumbled. Lady Cordelia's smile widened. "Honor, yes, that is certainly what he offers." The words struck bone. Alara excused herself and walked through the crowd, feeling every whisper cling to her skin like damp silk. She was the Duke's transaction, not his bride. Everyone knew it. She had known it. But knowing a blade is sharp does not stop the bleeding when it cuts. The first weeks at Hawthorne Hall were a study in silence. The estate was vast and beautiful, all rolling green hills and ancient oaks, but the halls inside echoed with emptiness. Alexander was rarely present, and when he was, he spoke to her as he might speak to a new steward, polite, precise, and utterly detached. He inquired about her comfort. He ensured her chambers were warm. He did not ask about her heart. Alara tried. She learned his preferences from the housekeeper. He favored black tea with no sugar. He read until the early hours. He despised disruption to his routine. She left a single rose on his desk every morning, not a declaration, just a small sign that someone saw him. The roses disappeared. He never mentioned them. She prepared to share her music with him one evening, sitting at the pianoforte in the blue drawing room, playing a piece her mother had taught her before she died. He walked in, paused at the door, and then turned away without a word. The notes died under her fingers. After that, she closed the lid of the pianoforte and did not open it again. One rain-soaked afternoon, she found him in the library, staring into the fire. His jaw was set, his eyes distant. Gathering her fragile courage, she sat in the chair opposite and said softly, "I am not asking for your heart, Your Grace. I am only asking to know you." He did not look at her. The fire popped. Then he said, "This marriage was a duty I accepted. I do not require more." He rose and left. Alara sat alone, the rain streaking the windows like tears she refused to shed. That night she did not sleep. She had given her hope freely, and he had returned it unopened. Pain began to calcify into something quieter. She would not beg for affection that was not there. A month later, the Dowager Duchess summoned her to the East Parlor. The old woman was formidable, with eyes like chipped flint, but she had shown Alara a gruff sort of respect since the wedding. "You look pale," the Dowager said without preamble. "This house eats spirit if you let it. My grandson is a cold man, but he was not always so. His parents' marriage was a battlefield, screaming rows, slammed doors, a mother who withered into illness from sheer misery. Alexander watched love destroy them both." He decided long ago that attachment was a weakness he would never permit himself. The old woman's voice dropped. "He is not cruel, child. He is afraid." Alara absorbed the words, and a thread of sympathy wove itself into her hurt. But sympathy could not warm an empty bed or fill a silent breakfast table. She thanked the dowager and retreated to her rooms, a new ache blooming beside the old one. He was not heartless, he was haunted. Yet knowing why he starved her did not make the starvation any less hungry. The turning point came at the Wexford ball, a glittering crush of society that Alara had dreaded for a week. She descended the carriage in a gown of deep emerald, her hair dressed with simple pearls, and Alexander offered his arm with mechanical courtesy. The moment they entered the ballroom, he was swallowed by lords and politicians, and she was left near the refreshment table, a statue in a moving crowd. She did not expect him to stay with her. She had long stopped expecting. But then the music shifted to a waltz, and she saw Lady Cordelia glide toward Alexander, her hand extended like a command. He took it. He led her to the floor, and they moved together with an ease that spoke of long familiarity. Whispers rose like smoke around Alara. "The Duke never dances. Lady Cordelia was his intended before the scandal. You know, the Wyndham marriage was forced by the grandmother." Alara's cheeks flamed. She watched her husband's hand settle on Lady Cordelia's waist, his head inclined toward her laughter. In that moment, Alara became a spectator to her own humiliation. She did not cry. She did not flee. She simply stood, breathing slowly, and let the last ember of her hope die. The waltz ended. Alexander did not seek her eyes. He escorted Lady Cordelia back to her circle and remained there, a glass of brandy in hand, looking more at ease than Alara had ever seen him. She left the ball alone. She ordered the carriage and returned to Hawthorne Hall in the dark, the silence of the night pressing against the windows. She unpinned her hair, removed the pearls, and sat on the edge of her bed, feeling as hollow as the halls around her. That night she made a quiet vow. She would no longer wait for a love that was never coming. She would become someone she respected, whether he noticed or not. The change began the next morning. Alara rose early and dressed in a simple wool gown, no silk, no finery. She went to the kitchens and asked the cook to show her the inventory of the tenant farms. She visited the village at the edge of the estate, speaking with widows and laborers, learning names and needs. She discovered that several cottages had leaking roofs, that a child needed medicine, that the old miller could no longer work and his family faced hunger. The Duke's steward, a harried man named Mr. Finch, was astonished when the Duchess appeared in his office with a list of remedies. "I will see to the miller's family personally," she said, her voice calm and curt. "Please have the roof repairs begin by week's end." Mr. Finch blinked. "But the Duke's ledgers are tight this quarter, Your Grace." She met his gaze. "Then use my personal allowance. Send the bills to me." She had never spent her pin money. It had accumulated like unread letters. Now it would do good. Weeks turned into a month. Alara spent her days among the tenants, her hands growing rough, her skin kissed by sun and wind. She organized a small school for the village children in an abandoned cottage, taught them to read using old books from the hall's forgotten library. She sat with the sick, comforted the grieving, and slowly the people of Hawthorne began to look at her not as a stranger bride, but as their duchess. Their loyalty grew around her like ivy. And with every life she touched, Alara felt the frozen parts of herself begin to thaw into strength. She no longer waited at the window for her husband's return. She no longer set a place for him at the dinner table because he rarely came. She ate in the village sometimes, sharing simple meals with families who laughed and welcomed her. Joy, she discovered, did not have to come from a man. It could come from purpose. Alexander noticed the change slowly, the way a man notices the shifting of the tide only after his feet are wet. The first prick of awareness came one evening when he entered the dining hall expecting to find her seated in her usual place, a quiet presence he had grown accustomed to ignoring. The chair was empty. The table was set for one. He stood in the doorway for a long moment, then asked the footman, "Where is the Duchess?" The footman hesitated. "Her Grace dined early in the village, I believe, Your Grace." "Dined early. In the village." He nodded stiffly and ate alone, the food tasting like ash. He did not know why it bothered him. He had cultivated solitude for years, yet the silence that night felt less like peace and more like abandonment. Another day, passing the east drawing room, he heard unfamiliar laughter. He paused. Through the half-open door, he saw Alara seated on the settee, a book in her lap, and across from her sat a young man with kind brown eyes and a physician's bag at his feet. The man, Nathaniel Hale, the new village doctor Alara had commissioned, was leaning forward, pointing at something in the book, his expression warm. Alara laughed again, a sound Alexander had never heard from her. It was light, unguarded, free. Something hot and possessive twisted in his chest. He stepped back into the shadows before they could see him. That night, sleep evaded him. He kept seeing the way the doctor had looked at his wife, as though she were the sun breaking through clouds, and the way she had looked back at him, with an ease she had never once shown Alexander. Jealousy was a poison he had never tasted before. He found he did not like its flavor. The weeks that followed were a slow unraveling of his certainties. He began to watch her. He noticed how the servant's eyes lit when she entered a room. He noticed the fresh flowers in the foyer arranged by her hand. He noticed her hair pinned simply now, her gowns less elaborate, her movements less hesitant. She no longer flinched when he spoke. She met his eyes with quiet composure and nothing more. She was polite, gracious, and utterly distant. He realized with a start that she had become to him exactly what he had always been to her, a courteous stranger, and it stung in ways he could not name. The revelation struck hardest on a gray afternoon when he returned early from a business trip to find Hawthorne Hall buzzing with activity. Carts of food and blankets lined the drive, and Alara stood in the courtyard, directing footmen and villagers with calm authority. A storm had ravaged the eastern tenant farms the night before, shearing roofs and flooding homes. Without waiting for his return, she had mobilized the entire estate. Alexander dismounted his horse and stood at the edge of the chaos, watching his wife lift a small child into a cart and wrap a blanket around its trembling shoulders. Her gown was mudded to the knees, her hair escaping its pins, but she looked more radiant than any lady in a ballroom. A strange, hollow ache opened in his chest. He had never seen her so alive, and he had never felt so far from her. Nathaniel Hale was at her side, carrying a heavy basket of supplies. He leaned close to say something, and Alara nodded, touching his arm briefly in gratitude. The gesture was innocent, but to Alexander's eyes it burned like a brand. He strode forward, his boots loud on the gravel. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice sharper than he intended. Alara turned, and for the first time in months her composure flickered. Not with fear, but with a quiet disappointment that cut deeper than any blade. "I am doing what needed to be done, Your Grace. The tenants could not wait for business to conclude." Her tone was not defiant. It was simply factual, as though his presence or absence had become irrelevant. That was the moment Alexander understood the depth of what he had lost. She did not need him. She did not even expect him. She had stopped expecting anything from him at all. That evening he sought out his grandmother in her parlor. The dowager sat in her high-backed chair, knitting needles clicking with relentless precision. "She is never here any more," he said, packing before the fire. "She is always in the village or with that physician." His grandmother's needles did not pause. "And whose fault is that, Alexander? You gave her a cold hearth and expected her to warm herself by it. She finally found a fire elsewhere, and now you burn with jealousy. How predictable." He stopped packing. "I am not jealous," the dowager snorted. "You are a duke, not a liar. You have spent years building walls so high you forgot there was a woman inside them. Now she has walked out the gate and you stand at the parapet crying that she left." She set down her knitting and fixed him with a steely gaze. "If you want her back, you must tear down every stone yourself. And you must do it before that kind doctor decides to offer her the warmth you never did." Her words were a lash. Alexander left the parlor in turmoil. That night he wandered the empty halls and found himself outside Alara's chamber door. He raised his hand to knock, then lowered it. What could he possibly say? He had no language for this aching, desperate thing clawing inside his ribs. He retreated to his study and drank brandy until the fire burned low. The crisis came 2 days later. Alara had spent the day in the village, helping to repair the worst of the storm damage, and had returned late, shivering and pale. By morning she was burning with fever. The house erupted into quiet panic. Alexander was in the stables when the news came. He ran to her chambers, his heart a frantic drum. He burst through the door to find Nathaniel already there, his expression grave. "It is lung fever," the physician said quietly. "She exhausted herself in the cold and damp. She needs constant care." Alexander pulled a chair to her bedside and did not leave. For 3 days and 3 nights he sat vigil, his hand holding hers, his eyes never straying from her flushed face. He sponged her brow, he whispered her name, he bargained with a god he had long ignored. The mask of the cold duke shattered completely. Servants saw him with tears tracking through his unshaven stubble. He did not care. On the second night, when the fever raged highest and Alara's breath came in shallow gasps, he finally broke. He pressed his forehead to her knuckles and spoke into the darkness. "You were never a duty. I was a coward. I saw my mother waste away from loving a cold man, and I swore I would never be the cause of that pain. I thought if I kept you at a distance I would save us both, but I only caused you a different kind of dying." His voice cracked. "I see you now. I see the woman who fixed my tenants' roofs and taught their children to read. I see the woman who laughed with a doctor and never once looked at me that way. And I would tear the world apart for one of those laughs. Please live. Please live so I can spend the rest of my life earning it." She did not hear him. She was lost in fever dreams, but the house heard. The servants heard. And Nathaniel Hale, pausing at the doorway to change the poultices, heard. He turned away quietly, a sad smile on his lips. He had known from the beginning that her heart, even broken, still resided in this great stone house. On the 4th morning, the fever broke. Alara opened her eyes to pale sunlight and the weight of a man slumped in the chair beside her, his dark head resting on the bed, his hand still wrapped around hers. She looked at him for a long time, her mind slow and clouded. She remembered storm waters and a child's cry, then nothing but fire and shadow. Now the fire was gone and Alexander was here. She shifted her fingers and he jerked awake, his eyes red-rimmed, his face etched with exhaustion and something else, something raw and unguarded. "You are awake," he breathed. She tried to speak, but her throat was sand. He brought a cup of water to her lips himself, his hand trembling. "I thought I lost you," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. "I thought you would never know." "Know what?" she managed, her voice a thread. He looked at her then, not with the cool detachment of the Duke, but with the desperate vulnerability of a man stripped bare. "That I have been a blind fool. That you are the best thing that ever happened to this house and to me, and I treated you as an obligation. I was afraid of loving you, so I made you feel unwelcome in your own home." He swallowed hard. "When I saw you with the doctor, laughing and at ease, I wanted to be the one who made you laugh. I wanted it so fiercely I could not breathe. And I had never let myself want anything before." He paused, a muscle jumping in his jaw. I love you, and I am terrified you no longer care." Alara closed her eyes. A single tear slid down her temple. The words she had dreamed of hearing for so long lay before her like a gift she was too weak to open. "I cared," she whispered. "For so long I cared. I left you roses. I played music you never stayed to hear. I waited at the dinner table until the candles burned down, and you never looked at me." Her voice trembled with old pain. "I had to stop. I had to survive." His hand tightened around hers. I know, and I am so sorry. I will spend every day proving to you that I see you now. If you will let me, if there is any part of you that can still hope." She turned her head on the pillow to look at him fully. The cold Duke was gone. In his place was a man as broken and hopeful as she had once been. It did not erase the loneliness, the humiliation at the ball, the silent meals, but it cracked something open in her chest, letting light seep into the hollow places. "I do not know if I can trust this," she admitted. "My heart learned to protect itself. It does not unlearn quickly." "Then I will wait," he said, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. "I will wait as long as you waited. Longer. I will court my own wife. I will earn your smiles the way I should have from the start." And he did. The weeks of her recovery were unlike anything she had ever experienced. Alexander, the most powerful man in the county, became a constant, gentle presence. He brought her tea himself. He read to her from the books she loved, his deep voice filling the quiet room. He asked about her village projects and listened with genuine interest, his questions thoughtful. He walked with her in the garden, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm, and pointed out the new greenhouse he had commissioned for her, filled with the roses she had once left on his desk. When she saw it, tears spilled down her cheeks. He looked panicked. "Do you not like it?" She shook her head, laughing through the tears. "I love it. I just never thought you noticed the roses at all." He cupped her face, his thumbs brushing the moisture away. "I kept every single one," he confessed, his voice thick. "They dried on my windowsill. I was too proud to tell you they meant something." Emotional reveals came one after another, peeling back the layers of their shared history. One afternoon, Ilara found him in the library, a worn leather journal open in his hands, his mother's diary. He looked up, his eyes shadowed. "I want you to know why I was the way I was," he said. He read her passages, agonized entries from a woman trapped in a loveless match, writing of how her husband's disdain had slowly erased her will to live. "I saw her fade," Alexander said quietly. "I was 12. I promised myself I would never let love have that power over me, so I locked it away." He closed the journal. "But locking it away did not protect me. It only made me hurt you." Ilara knelt before his chair and took his hands. "Then we will break that chain together," she said. "Your mother suffered because she was alone. You are not alone anymore." The final healing came on an evening when the sky turned soft lavender and the scent of roses drifted through the open windows. Alexander led her to the pianoforte in the blue drawing room, the one she had not touched since the night he walked away. He lifted the lid and sat beside her. "Play for me," he said. "I want to hear the music I was too foolish to stay for." She hesitated, her fingers ghosting over the keys. Then she began to play the same piece her mother had taught her, the notes sweet and melancholy. This time he did not leave. He closed his eyes, and when the last chord faded, he reached for her hand and pressed it to his lips. "It was beautiful," he said. "You are beautiful, and I am so sorry it took me this long to say it." That night they stood together on the terrace, looking out over the dark silhouette of Hawthorne Hall's rolling lands. The air was warm, and fireflies blinked in the hedgerows like tiny fallen stars. Ilara leaned into his side, and he wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her hair. "I almost lost everything," he murmured. "But you gave me a second chance I do not deserve." She turned in his arms and looked up at the man who had once been a fortress. The walls were gone now, and all that remained was a heart that beat for her. "We both gave each other something," she said. "You gave me a reason to stop waiting. I gave you a reason to start feeling. Maybe we needed the distance to find our way back." He smiled, a real smile, the kind that crinkled his eyes and made him look years younger. "I will never stop being grateful you stopped caring long enough for me to realize what I had." He kissed her forehead, a long, tender press of lips that said more than words could. "I love you, Ilara. I will love you until the stones of this house turn to dust." She lifted her hand to his cheek, feeling the warmth of his skin, the slight roughness of his jaw. "Then I will let you," she said, slowly, day by day. And in that quiet promise lay the beginning of something neither of them had ever truly known, a love not born of duty but of choice. A love that had walked through the fire of neglect and jealousy and regret and emerged not unscathed but whole. Hawthorne Hall, once a place of echoes and cold hearths, began to fill with quiet laughter, with shared glances across crowded rooms, with the unshakable peace of two people who had found each other after all. In the village, the tenants spoke of the Duke and Duchess with a kind of wonder. They had seen the cold man transformed by the gentle woman who refused to be broken, and they had seen the woman who once walked with her head down now stride through the fields with her husband's hand in hers, her eyes bright with a confidence hard-won. Lady Cordelia, seeing them at a later gathering, turned away with a pinched mouth, for there was no room for her schemes any more. The Duke had eyes for only one woman, and everyone knew it. 1 year after the fever, on a morning kissed by early autumn, Alexander led Alara to the old oak at the edge of the eastern meadow, the very spot where she had once organized the storm relief. He knelt in the grass, something he had never done even at their wedding, and opened a velvet box. Inside lay a ring, not a cold ancestral heirloom, but a new band of intertwined rose gold and silver, delicate leaves etched into the metal. "I asked you to marry me once as a duty," he said, his voice unsteady. "Now I am asking as a man who cannot breathe without you. Will you marry me again, Alara? Will you be my wife in every way that matters?" She laughed, a sound full and bright, and pulled him to his feet. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slid the ring onto her finger, and the meadow seemed to hold its breath around them. They walked back to the hall slowly, her head resting against his shoulder. She looked at the house that had once felt like a prison and saw it now for what it truly was, a home. A home she had rebuilt with patience and resilience, one act of kindness at a time. And at her side was the man who had finally learned that love is not a weakness, but the bravest thing a person can do. The pain of the past was not forgotten, but it had softened into the foundation of something stronger. She had stopped waiting, and in stopping, she had found everything she had ever hoped for.